Some stories begin with a crime, a body, a weapon, a mystery to be solved. But the most unsettling stories often begin with an absence, with a silence. They begin with a man who walks into the jungle and is never seen again. This is one of those stories. But the question is not what happened to the man who disappeared. The real question is, what was he? The year is 1965. The place is Côte d'Ivoire, the Ivory Coast, a nation pulsing with the new energy of post-colonial freedom. In this world of shifting power and ancient traditions, one man stands out as a bridge between two cultures: Félix Monua. He is a French official, but more than that, he is a respected scholar, an ethnographer, a man who has dedicated his life to studying the intricate cultures and beliefs of West Africa. He is known for his intellect, his charm, and his deep, seemingly genuine love for the continent. One day, Monua travels deep into the country's interior on a research trip to a remote region. And then, nothing. He vanishes without a trace. The initial assumption is a simple one, if tragic. He was a European who ventured too far into the wilderness. Perhaps he fell ill, was attacked by an animal, or got lost in the dense, unforgiving jungle. A classic tale of a man consumed by the very wilderness he sought to understand. But as the French and Ivorian authorities begin their investigation, a different story begins to emerge. A story whispered in the shadows of colonial administration buildings, in the hushed tones of police officers who have seen too much. They uncover a pattern, a dark thread that follows Félix Monua from post to post, from country to country across Africa. A pattern of unsolved ritualistic murders, brutal killings that bear the signature of the most feared secret society in Africa, the Leopard men. And soon, the investigation is no longer about finding a missing scholar. It becomes a hunt for a monster. The authorities are faced with a terrifying possibility that Félix Monua was not a victim of the jungle at all. That he was, in fact, the predator. That the respected European ethnographer, the man of culture and science, was secretly the very thing he claimed to study. A monster hiding in plain sight. So, who was Félix Monua? Was he a brilliant scholar who met a tragic end, his name unjustly stained by rumor and suspicion? Or was he something else entirely? A man with a double life, a savage secret, a darkness that wore a human face. This is not just an investigation into a disappearance. It is an investigation into the very nature of a man's soul, a journey into the heart of a colonial mystery where the line between the civilized and the savage becomes terrifyingly blurred. To understand the mystery, we must first understand the man, or at least the man the world thought it knew. Félix Monua was, by all accounts, a product of the French intellectual elite. Born in France, he was well-educated, well-spoken, and possessed an insatiable curiosity. While many of his contemporaries in the colonial service saw Africa as a place to be administered and exploited, Monua saw it as a living museum, a treasure trove of ancient cultures. He specialized in ethnography, the scientific study of customs, beliefs, and social structures. His work was considered brilliant. He published papers. He corresponded with academics in Paris. He built a reputation as one of the foremost European experts on West African secret societies. He was not just an observer, he immersed himself. He learned local dialects. He gained the trust of village elders. He was invited to witness ceremonies and rituals that were closed off to other outsiders. His colleagues described him as intense, charismatic, but also deeply private. He was a man who listened more than he spoke, his eyes constantly observing, analyzing. He spent years moving through the French colonial territories of Dahomey, Guinea, and finally, Côte d'Ivoire. In each post, he was seen as a model administrator, efficient, intelligent, and unusually respectful of the local populations. He was the perfect image of the enlightened European, bringing order and understanding to a dark continent. This was the official portrait of Félix Monua, a man of science and reason. But behind this portrait, another reality was taking shape, a reality soaked in blood and terror. To understand the horror that was whispered in connection with his name, we must first understand the Leopard Society. This was not a myth or a legend. It was a real and deeply feared secret society that operated for centuries across West and Central Africa. Its members believed that through a magical ritual, they could transform into leopards or gain the leopard's strength and ferocity. Their killings were not simple murders. They were ritualistic acts. The victims were often ambushed at dusk on jungle paths. They were killed with sharp, claw-like weapons, their bodies torn apart as if by a real leopard. The flesh was sometimes consumed in cannibalistic rites, designed to increase the power of the society's members. For local populations, there was no greater terror. The leopard men were a force of supernatural horror, a law unto themselves. For the colonial authorities, the Leopard Society was a nightmare. It represented the savage heart of Africa that they could not control or understand. Whenever a mutilated body was found, it was easy to blame the killings on this shadowy cult. It was an explanation that required no further investigation. It was simply the way of the jungle. The investigation into Monua's disappearance began to challenge this easy explanation. As detectives looked back at his career, they started to see a disturbing correlation. They compiled a list of unsolved ritualistic murders that had occurred over the past decade in the regions where Monua had been stationed. A killing in Guinea, another two in Dahomey, a series of them in Côte d'Ivoire. On the surface, they were all attributed to local leopard cults. But when a meticulous French detective began to connect the dots, he found something unsettling. Many of these murders bore specific, unusual hallmarks that deviated from the traditional methods of the leopard men. The level of surgical precision in some of the mutilations, for example, was uncharacteristic. Furthermore, the killings often ceased in one region as soon as Monua was transferred out, and a new series of similar killings would begin in the region where he arrived. It was a faint, almost invisible trail of blood, but it seemed to follow him. The theory that began to form was almost too monstrous to contemplate. What if a European, a man of science, was using the very real terror of the leopard men as a perfect cover for his own homicidal urges? He had the knowledge. He had studied their methods, their rituals, their psychology. He knew exactly how to mimic their killings. And he knew that the colonial authorities would never look for a white man. They would simply blame the locals and close the case. It was, in theory, the perfect crime. The investigators were trapped in a horrifying paradox. The very expertise that made Monua a brilliant scholar also made him the perfect potential suspect. He knew what rituals were performed. He knew what parts of the body were taken. He knew how to make a murder look like the work of a cult. The search for the missing Monua now took on a grim, new dimension. The teams that plunged into the jungle were no longer just looking for the body of a victim. They were also searching his last known camp, his abandoned belongings, looking for proof. They were looking for the monster's tools, a hidden knife, a set of metal claws, a blood-stained diary entry, anything that would confirm their terrible suspicions. They found nothing. The jungle had swallowed him whole, leaving behind only his reputation and the dark questions that now swirled around it. His disappearance was as clean and absolute as the crimes he was suspected of committing. This left the authorities with a fractured, incomplete investigation. They had a compelling theory, a disturbing pattern, but no body, no confession, and no concrete evidence. They could not officially declare the respected Félix Monua a serial killer. To do so without proof would be to create a massive scandal, an embarrassment for the French government in a newly independent nation. It would be an admission that one of their own was not a civilizing force, but a savage who had gone native in the most terrifying way imaginable. And so, the case was quietly shelved. Officially, Félix Monua remains a missing person, presumed dead. a victim of the African wilderness. But unofficially, his name became a dark legend among the colonial old guard, a ghost story they told each other in hushed voices. The story of the brilliant scholar who may have been Africa's most elusive Jack the Ripper. The story should have ended there. A strange, unsolved footnote in the bloody history of colonialism. But the questions remain, and they are what make this case a true psychological thriller. If Monua was the killer, what was his motive? Was it a simple, psychopathic bloodlust that he disguised with academic curiosity? Or was it something deeper, something stranger? Had his obsession with the secret societies of Africa crossed a line? Did he, in his mind, cease to be an observer and become a participant? Did he go into the jungle not just to study the leopard men, but to join them? Or is there another possibility? The most disturbing of all. That there was no leopard society involved at all. That it was always him, a lone, white predator moving through the African night, cloaked in the superstitions of a culture he knew so well, using the continent's deepest fears as his own personal hunting ground, the ultimate act of colonial arrogance and horror. The scholar who did not just observe the darkness, but became it. The narrative of Félix Monua, the esteemed ethnographer, abruptly shattered the moment his disappearance became intertwined with the chilling legend of the Leopard Men. But who were these terrifying figures, and how did their lore become the perfect canvas for a potential predator? The Leopard Society, or Anyoto, was not a mere superstition. It was a deeply ingrained, ritualistic organization spanning West and Central Africa. Its members believed they could harness the spirit of the leopard to exact justice or wield power. Their killings were profound, symbolic acts. Victims were found with wounds mimicking a leopard's claws and teeth, deep gashes, punctures, and often deliberate disembowelment. Specific organs were sometimes removed and consumed in secret rituals to transfer the animal's strength to the participant. The terror they inspired was immense, a primal fear that transcended colonial law. To the local populace, these were acts of dark magic. It was this very terror that ironically offered Monua a cloak of invisibility. As a highly educated European, he possessed an intimate knowledge of these societies, meticulously documenting their practices and motivations. He knew the jungle paths, the village customs, and the patterns of belief. He could create a crime scene that screamed leopard men, diverting suspicion from himself entirely. After all, what European would commit such acts? The colonial mindset dictated that such savagery belonged exclusively to the primitive inhabitants of the continent. Monua understood this prejudice perfectly. It was his ultimate shield. The cold, hard facts of the police investigation, however, started to chip away at this comfortable prejudice. French detectives, initially dismissing the notion of a European serial killer, found themselves confronted with an unsettling timeline. Unsolved murders, bearing the distinct hallmarks of the Leopard Men, seemed to appear in the exact geographical locations where Monua was conducting his fieldwork. Take, for instance, a gruesome case from 1958 in Dahomey. A village elder was found dead, his body mutilated in a manner attributed to the Leopard Society. The local authorities quickly closed the case. Yet, police records show that Monua, on a research sabbatical, had been residing in a mission a mere 30 kilometers from that village at the time of the murder. A coincidence? Perhaps. But then, a year later, a similar killing occurred in a different district shortly after Monua had transferred there for a new research project. The pattern solidified over the years. A series of isolated incidents, each perfectly mirroring the gruesome signature of the Leopard Men, always within Monua's orbit. These were not the widespread attacks of a thriving cult, but precision strikes, almost surgical in their execution, localized and then ceasing abruptly when Monua moved on. This growing body of circumstantial evidence pushed the investigators into unthinkable territory. The respected ethnographer was potentially exploiting his own understanding to commit heinous crimes. His meticulous notes, his diagrams of ritual weapons, his insights into tribal psychology, all could be twisted into a horrifying blueprint for murder. The very tools of his academic trade could just as easily serve a darker purpose. Imagine the sheer audacity required for such a double life. By day, a respected scholar, engaging in intellectual discourse. By night, a predator, moving silently through the shadows, mimicking the very savagery he claimed to study. The ultimate chameleon, blending seamlessly into both the colonial administration and the terrifying mythology of the African interior. The more the investigators delved, the more they realized the implications of such a discovery. If Monua were indeed the Leopard Man, it would not just be a scandal, it would be an earthquake. It would expose the ultimate hypocrisy of colonialism, where the civilized European was revealed to be a more brutal savage than any primitive he sought to subdue. The French government, still reeling from the messy decolonization process, could not afford such an international humiliation. The political ramifications alone were enough to ensure that the truth, if it were indeed this dark, would never see the light of day. And this leads us back to his disappearance. Was it a genuine tragedy, the jungle finally claiming its intellectual explorer? Or was it the ultimate escape? The final, brilliant act of a man who knew his carefully constructed world was about to crumble. Consider the circumstances. Monua was on a solo research trip in a remote, scarcely populated area. He left no detailed itinerary. It was as if he deliberately vanished into the most impenetrable part of the continent. The search parties combed the dense foliage but found no body and no signs of struggle. Only his abandoned camp, meticulously packed as if he had simply walked away. The lack of a body was both a blessing and a curse for the investigation. A blessing because it meant no definitive proof of his guilt. A curse because it meant no definitive proof of his innocence either. It left a void, filled only with speculation and the chilling whispers of a monstrous possibility. The case of Félix Monua became a cold case, officially marked as missing, presumed dead. But for the detectives who worked on it, the questions lingered. They couldn't shake the feeling that they had been outmaneuvered by a master illusionist, a man who had used the very fabric of his academic life as a smokescreen for a terrifying reality. What drove him? Was it a deep-seated pathology, a compulsion for violence masked by intellect? Or was it something more twisted, a perverse intellectual curiosity pushed to its most extreme and deadly conclusion? Did he seek to experience the primal in its purest form, to become the very subject of his study? Did he believe he was transcending the mundane, achieving a form of dark enlightenment through these forbidden acts? The chilling possibility is that Félix Monua was not just a killer, but an ultimate manipulator, a man who understood human fear, colonial prejudice, and the power of myth. A man who built his empire of terror on the very foundations of his scholarly reputation. A scientist who conducted the most horrifying experiment of all, transforming himself from observer to monster and disappearing into the darkness he so meticulously studied. His story serves as a terrifying reminder that the greatest monsters often hide behind the most respectable masks, and that sometimes the most impenetrable mysteries are not about where someone went, but who they truly were all along. The jungle keeps its secrets, but the most disturbing secrets are often the ones we carry within ourselves. The disappearance of Félix Monua left a vacuum, a void where a man used to be. Into this void poured a torrent of suspicion, creating a monstrous legend that threatened to eclipse the memory of the scholar. The evidence trail had gone cold, and the official investigation dissolved into a quiet, unresolved file. But in the absence of facts, theories begin to breed, and the investigation had to consider every possibility, no matter how unsettling. The primary theory, whispered by horrified detectives, was that Monua was the killer. a man of science who had weaponized his knowledge to become a perfect predator. But a proper investigation must challenge its own assumptions. What if the narrative of the evil scholar was merely a convenient fiction? Let us consider another path, the path where Félix Monua was simply a victim, an academic who, in his quest for knowledge, ventured too deep into a world he did not truly understand. The jungles of West Africa were not a library. They were a place of real danger. It is entirely plausible that Monua, studying the Leopard Society, got too close and was discovered witnessing a secret ritual. The society, fiercely protective of its secrets, might have seen him not as a harmless academic, but as a threat, a spy for the colonial government. In this version, his death would have been a brutal warning. The pattern of murders that seemed to follow him could be reinterpreted as a grim coincidence, the actions of a very real cult that tragically sealed his reputation after his death. He would be the ultimate victim, killed by the subjects of his life's work, then posthumously branded a monster. Then, there is a more conspiratorial possibility. Monua was framed. By 1965, Côte d'Ivoire was a newly independent nation, a minefield of competing interests. Monua, with his deep knowledge of the country's interior and its secret societies, was a man who knew too much. What if he stumbled upon a different kind of secret? Not a magical ritual, but illegal diamond smuggling, political corruption, or a plot against the new government. In this scenario, his expertise would make him the perfect scapegoat. The real killers could commit their own murders and easily pin them on the eccentric French scholar obsessed with leopard men. His disappearance would be the final act of the frame-up, a convenient way to silence a witness and create a legendary monster to blame for their crimes. This leads to an even darker rabbit hole: espionage. Was Monua's academic work merely a cover? In the thick of the Cold War, Africa was a battleground for influence. An ethnographer with unparalleled access to remote regions would be the perfect intelligence asset. His research trips could have been a front for mapping strategic locations or making contact with anti-communist factions. If his cover was blown, his elimination would have been swift and absolute, carried out by rival intelligence agents who would leave no trace. So we are left with 4 possible identities for one man: a tragic victim, a convenient scapegoat, a silenced spy, or a psychopathic killer. Each theory is plausible, built on the same scarce evidence interpreted through a different lens. The truth remains buried, perhaps in a shallow, unmarked grave in the Ivorian jungle, or perhaps in a dusty, classified file in a Parisian intelligence archive. Perhaps the heart of the mystery lies not in conspiracies or spy games, but in the unique psychological pressures of the colonial world itself. There was a recognized phenomenon among Europeans in the colonies, a form of madness often called going native. The isolation, the cultural dislocation, and the immense power over the local population could sometimes shatter a European's psyche. Joseph Conrad's famous novel, Heart of Darkness, explored this very theme. The idea that the civilized man, when removed from his society and given absolute power, might find a terrifying, primitive darkness lurking within his own soul. Was Félix Monua a real-life Kurtz? Did his academic detachment crumble under the psychological weight of his environment? Did his study of ritual violence slowly become a fascination and then a participation? It is a deeply unsettling thought that the journey into the heart of darkness was not a geographical one, but an internal one. That Africa did not kill him, but merely awakened something that was dormant inside him all along. The official story was, and remains, the simplest one. Félix Monua, a French citizen, went missing in the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire in 1965. Despite an extensive search, his body was never recovered. The case was closed. The file was archived. The world moved on. But legends have a longer life than official records. In the bars and diplomatic clubs of West Africa, the story of the Leopard Man was told for years. a cautionary tale about the dangers of the continent and the hidden darkness within men's souls. It became a part of the very folklore Monua himself had once studied. His story is the ultimate cold case, a perfect knot of speculation where every thread of evidence can be pulled in multiple directions. He is a ghost haunting the end of the colonial era, a symbol of its deepest anxieties and most violent secrets. The scholar's meticulous research and the monster's savage crimes remain perfectly, horrifyingly intertwined. And because there is no final answer, we are forced to look at the terrifying possibility at the center of it all. That the scholar and the monster were, in fact, the same man. That a brilliant mind, dedicated to understanding culture, used that very understanding to become a predator, hiding his savagery not behind a mask of leaves and fur, but behind a mask of civilization itself. The story of Félix Monua offers no easy conclusions. It leaves us with a set of conflicting truths and a deep sense of unease. A man of science, a potential monster, a victim of the jungle, or a master of its darkest arts. The evidence is gone, the witnesses are silent, and the truth is owned by the jungle. Now, we turn the investigation over to you. Based on the story you have heard, who do you think the real Félix Monua was? Was he an innocent scholar, a tragic victim of circumstance? Was he a scapegoat, framed to cover up a darker political conspiracy? Or do you believe he was the monster, a real-life Jack the Ripper who used his intellect and the superstitions of a continent to conduct a reign of terror in the shadows? Share your theories, your analysis, and your verdict in the comments below.